Good morning. Great to be with you again, at least in this version, and hoping soon to be in person as we continue on in this interesting time that we're in. Today I want to do part 2 of a little series I've called Processing Loss and Learning to Grieve Well. These may be the most important skills in becoming emotionally and spiritually healthy. And I think it's really at the core of everything that we've been talking about leading up to this point. I think also that it's the very reason that the book of Job was inspired to be written down and preserved for us all this time. Remember, Job is the oldest book we have in the Bible, and I think there's a reason why God wants us to learn this early on and all the way through the history of his relating to people. See, Job really wants us to know not only what to do when we face loss, when we face a situation that makes us grieve. He wants us to know that our first reaction he models for us, like we talked about last week, is worship. And the second reaction is to not blame God. And we see that Job helps us through this just initial reaction to order our thoughts and preserve our faith in the midst of dealing with loss. And so Job's going to continue to help us look at these issues. There's 2 more things I want to bring out from the book of Job today, which have personally helped me. I've taken 5 different responses that Job had toward God in the situation of suffering and kind of drawn lessons about them and then applied them to my own life. So this is very personal, what I'm sharing, and it really works. And I've tried it lots of times. So today we're going to look at 2 more things that are absolutely crucial. You know, in the first issue is simply this. In the midst of loss and pain and suffering, all of you already know this. This is not news. There's a huge temptation to quit, to give up on God. And, there's so many voices in our head. There's so many voices in the culture around us and so many other voices which just tell us, hey, God's not here. He's not helping you. Just quit. It's not worth it. Have you ever heard those voices? I know I have. I have lots of times. Even in this pandemic we're now facing, I've heard those voices say, hey, where is God? What's he doing? He doesn't seem to be doing anything, and this and that and the other thing. And that's not the Holy Spirit speaking, and it's not even my own thoughts, although I can have those thoughts for sure. But those are thoughts that are coming at me under the pressure. Now, in dealing with this whole issue of quitting on God, of not hanging in there, Job gives a response in chapter 13, verse 15, written down for us. And he's in the midst of a long conversation with 3 of his friends called Job's comforters. And kind of sarcastic, they weren't bringing him much comfort at all. But in the midst of this long debate, Job says this in verse 15, Job 13:15. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Let's put that in our own language. Even if he kills me, I'm not going to give up on God. I'm not going to quit on God. I'm not going to lose my hope on him. You know, it's very intense when you're in a lot of pain. It's intense when you're suffering. And Job is maintaining to his friends that, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve what's happening to me. Of course, they didn't believe him at all because they were convinced and they had a very natural thought. If you do good things, God does good things for you. If you do bad things, God punishes you. And it's on this basic philosophy that they're talking to Job and saying, hey, you need to confess. You need to give it up. You need to be real. You need to admit what's going on and throw yourself on the mercy of God. That's what they're saying to him. And Job is saying, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve what's going on. Now, the problem is that we know from Job chapter 1 that Job is right. He didn't do anything to deserve this. He didn't do anything to bring this on. This was something that happened in heaven between God and Satan. And so, but Job's friends don't know that, and Job doesn't know what happened in heaven. So he's just saying, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve this. And in that context, he makes this statement. Right in that, he says, even if he kills me, I'm not going to give up on God, and I'm not going to admit to something that I didn't do. And his friends don't really believe him, and the conversation goes on. But he says, even if he kills me, I'm going to choose. And that's the point at which we really need to understand what Job is really saying. What he's saying is that not even death, right up until death, I'm going to still choose to trust him. Not even death is a big enough issue for me to stop trusting God. That's what Job is saying. Now that's faith under the most extreme of pressures. And that's trust lived out under the most extreme pressures. And here's my question. When do you make a decision to trust God like that? When do you make that decision? I can tell you, if you don't make that trust before a crisis hits, before the pain comes, before the suffering happens, it's really hard to make that decision in the midst of pain and suffering because it's so disorienting, it's so hard. So you make this kind of decision before it happens. Nothing or no one is going to make me quit putting my trust in God, even if I die. Now, you know, Laura and I were talking right when the whole coronavirus pandemic erupted and was going on, and there was all that fear and panic and all this great talk about death and this and that. And you guys all remember the very beginning days. In that moment, Laura and I actually had this conversation. We talked about it, and we reminded ourselves that we're going to choose to trust God. We're choosing to trust God no matter what happens. We're going to put our trust in him right up until the moment we take our last breath. We had already made that decision. We had faced some things before which had tested that decision. And we just reminded ourselves at the beginning of this pandemic that, hey, we're not going to alter course now. We're going to trust him right there. Now, that doesn't mean that our trust doesn't waver from time to time. If you know us well, you'll know sometimes it's a struggle to trust. But the decision to trust, we've already made. And we keep reaffirming that choice to trust again and again. So Job really models this for us, and that really helps us. There's a second response that Job has, and he models a second thing that I think is really important as well for us to take in. And it's simply this. And again, it's a very common feeling. It's a common experience that many of us face when we're under tremendous pressure in the midst of pain and suffering and loss. And there's one question that will come into your head again and again and again, and it's simply this: God, where are you? Why can't I find you? Where are you when I need you? Why aren't you closer? Why aren't you speaking? Why can't I connect to you? These kind of questions will come again and again. Have you ever heard those questions? Yeah, in the last week or two, the last month? Have you heard those questions? I've heard them inside of my mind, and I've asked those kind of questions. And Job reveals one of the greatest truths and principles in all of the scriptures when it comes to these kinds of questions. In chapter 23, verses 8 to 10, this is what Job says. He says, "If I go to the east, God is not there. If I go to the west, I can't find him. When he is at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him." And then he comes to the really amazing thing. He says, but he knows, God knows where I am. He knows the way that I take. And when he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. What Job is saying is so incredible. He's saying, God, I can't find you anywhere. I've done everything I normally do to connect to you, and none of it's working. East, west, north, south. I've tried everything. And he says, but I choose to trust that you know where I am. And when this time of testing is over, I'm going to be better off for it. You're going to meet me, and I will be better off for it. I can't tell you how many times I've used this. I don't know for whatever reason it is, but when our emotions get stirred up, when our emotions are on high levels of alert and everything's crazy going on around us, it's hard to hear the voice of God sometimes, isn't it? It's hard to get connected. When everything is peaceful and good and relaxing, it seems like it's so easy to quiet ourselves down and listen to the voice of God. When stuff is raging around us and inside of us, and it's hard to quiet some of that stuff down. I think that's just normal for all of us. But Job is saying, in the midst of dealing with loss, which is the theme that we're talking about, in the midst of dealing with pressure and suffering and pain and all that, it can be really hard to find God. And it's in this moment again, just like in the last issue we looked at, he chose to trust God. He says, you know what? Nothing I'm trying is working, but God knows where I am, and I'm just going to let him find me. And I'm going to choose to trust him in the midst of it. What an amazing picture of wisdom Job is putting on display. And I think we need to learn to choose, again, the same. And I don't know about you, but I can get really busy trying to do this and do that and try to connect here and do that. And hey, I play this worship song. God always uses it. And I try to, and it didn't work that time, and on and on and on. And so I think that what we need to recognize from Job's model, from his example, from the wisdom he displays, is simply this. Trust that God knows where you are. He knows what you need. And we may go through a time of difficulty in connecting, difficulty in hearing his voice, but this is part of the testing process. What's being tested? Our faith. Are we going to trust God or not? And Job is saying, I'm going to choose to trust him. Even when nothing I normally do works, I'm going to choose to trust him because he knows where I am. And I love that. If you feel like God's far away in these days, if you feel stuck, if you feel overwhelmed by emotions, if you feel like you don't have perspective, I just want to give you this exhortation, this encouragement. Follow Job's model. It's an amazing model. It's amazing choices. In these two issues that we looked at today, he says, trust God. And you know what? You can make the decision ahead of time. You can say, when I get in those situations, I'm going to already have decided that I'm going to choose to trust God. Nothing's going to separate me from God. Even if he kills me, I'm going to still put my hope in him. And if I can't connect to him in any way I want, I know that he knows where I am. And when this time of testing is over, I'm going to be better off for it. Why? Because I'm putting my trust in God. That's what Job models for us. So let me kind of summarize the last 2 weeks. Some to-dos following Job's model. When stuff happens, when we're trying to process loss, one of the first things we need to do is make sure our knee-jerk reactions are first to worship. Now what I do is I put my headphones on and I turn on one of my worship playlists and I make it loud enough that nothing else can intrude. And most of the time when I start that, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel even like, wow, I'm really into this, but I choose to participate. And man, I force myself and I start singing loud. Laura's threatened to secretly record this singing and play it all for you. However, you know what it sounds like when someone who has loud music in their headphones is singing. It's not even close to being the right melodies and notes and whatnot. Enough said. Anyway, if Laura does sneak that out in one of the Facebook videos, I'll be very embarrassed for sure. But man, I worship, and I've been doing that this week a number of times. And the second thing that I do is I start to pray the attributes of God. God, you are good. You are loving. You are kind. You give grace. Now, that's not an emotional prayer. Those are things I believe about God, that I know about God, and I'm reminding myself while I'm bringing that to God. And the result of that is, and I choose not to blame you in any way with any kind of wrongdoing in the situation that I'm going through. It's a way of making a trusting choice again. And then the third thing we talked about today, I make the decision to choose to trust him no matter what. No matter how bleak it gets, no matter how bad it gets, I'm going to choose to trust him right up until my last breath. Even if he kills me, I'm going to keep putting my hope and my trust in him. And then the fourth thing, when I really struggle to connect, when I really struggle to hear his voice, I simply pray, God, I don't know why this isn't working the way I want it to, but I know you know where I am. And I'm just going to wait here. And I give him time. I give him time. This week I went out and spent half a day alone with him just to try to clear my head, try to hear his voice, and simply telling him, God, I don't know how to hear you in the way I want, but you know where I'm at. Come and find me. And he did. He did. Now, he didn't answer all the questions that I had like I wanted, but his presence was there. And you know what? That's enough for me. And I hope it's enough for you. Listen, Job's model works. Try it. Try it. Let me just pray for you. Father, thank you for this truth. Thank you for Job's model. And Lord, I ask for every person here who's struggling to trust you, God, in this time, I pray you'd meet him right now. You meet him in the story of Job and through the story of Job, and that they could learn to make these choices to trust you like Job did. And that when those things happen, I know, Lord, their faith will grow, they will become more pure, and it will work. And you will meet us at the end of this, and you will bring us through. And we can't wait. We can't wait. In Jesus' name, amen. Lord is good. He's really good. All right, see you next week.